Hey Journey, I'm Abby, our Next Steps pastor, and excited that you're here hanging out with us this weekend, no matter where you're watching from, whether that's your bedroom, your living room, or the beach, which if you're at the beach, I'm totally jealous. Either way, we are glad that you're here. Now, maybe you wouldn't consider yourself a church person. Maybe you would consider yourself the exact opposite of a church person. We're glad that you're here too. Maybe you just found us today when you were scrolling through and you decided to click that watch button, or maybe you had a friend who's been inviting you 10 times or 10 billion times and you said, you know what, I'll watch this weekend just so you stop inviting me. Either way, we are glad that you guys are here because our church is meant for people just like you. And so this weekend, we're going to be wrapping up a series called Frequency, which is all about how we hear from God. And I think all of us, no matter who we are or what our background is, we all have this question and this desire to get direction from God. We want to know, what should we do next? And so all throughout this series, we've been looking at the life of a guy named Elijah. And Elijah was a prophet, which basically just means that he heard from God, and then he would tell all the people around him what God had said, which pretty cool job, right? Who wouldn't want that, to hear from God and then tell all the other people around you what God had said? And so today we're looking at the final piece of that story when God gives him some clear direction for what to do next. Now, any of you out there ever wish that God or somebody would just give you some clear direction, tell you what to do next? I know it's a little bit dependent on our personality type, but for somebody like me, when I'm faced with a lot of choices, I just don't know what to do. I feel totally overwhelmed. And I've learned that there is an official name for it, which is analysis paralysis. A fancy way of saying when there are so many things to choose from, we can't choose because it's just too hard. Now, the unofficial name for this is indecisiveness, which all of you guys out there, you've probably experienced this, right? Your wife or your girlfriend tells you that she doesn't want dessert. So you order dessert, but then all of a sudden you find her fork in your cheesecake. And listen, I'm here to tell you, on behalf of women everywhere, we didn't know that we wanted the cheesecake until we saw the cheesecake, all right? Like, we were just indecisive. And I know that happens for me coming around tax season. So April 15th starts to loom and I gotta fill out my taxes and I'm overwhelmed because I'm like, I don't really understand this. There are so many choices. I'm not really great at math. And this is why TurboTax is a gift from the Lord. All right, I'm telling you right now, like, TurboTax walks you through every single step so that all the indecisive people like me don't have to wonder. It tells you, put box A, line 2 here. Put box B, line 14 here. And I'm like, TurboTax, thank you. I could not do this without you. Otherwise, too many choices, all right? And I think all of us, no matter who we are, no matter what our personality type, we've all had these moments where we felt like we just didn't know what to do next. And so today, when we pick up Elijah's story, we're going to see him in this place. He doesn't quite know what to do next. And if you've missed some of the last messages in this series, I want to encourage you, watch them on YouTube this week. You can find them right there, and it gives you the whole background of Elijah's life. But basically, Elijah has this mountaintop moment. All right, so he had prayed some big prayers and God showed up for him in a big way. He was full of faith. It was incredible. But then right after that, there was a woman named Jezebel, an evil but powerful woman who had threatened to kill him. And all of a sudden, he was in a valley moment. He was scared. He started to run away. He felt alone and isolated. And have you ever had a time like that in your life? You've got this mountaintop moment. You're on top of the world, and then all of a sudden, it feels like the world is on top of you. That's Elijah here. And so he ran away. He was isolated. He was depressed. He was alone. And when we find Elijah, God comes after him and God asks him, he says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And when Elijah responds, it is clear that he's not in a very good place. Because basically how he responds, he says, God, I've given everything for you. I've got big faith. And look at where that big faith got me. Here, alone. Scared, depressed, discouraged, isolated. And he said, man, God, no one even has faith like me. And now people are trying to kill me. It is just not fair. And have you ever had one of those it's not fair moments in your life? I know I've had plenty of them, especially in the past few weeks. Maybe you have as well. Sometimes it feels like life just isn't fair. It's like I'm working so hard, but yet he gets the good grades or he gets the promotion. Or it's just not fair. Maybe it's like, man, I feel like I'm eating well and I'm exercising and she eats Twinkies and she looks like that and I look like this. Like it is just not fair. And I find that we so often start saying it's not fair more and more when we find ourselves, well, by ourselves, isolated, alone. And that's Elijah here. He is stuck in his own broken way of thinking and seeing the world. He starts to get in his own head. And doesn't that happen to all of us sometimes? We get alone, we get discouraged, and we start to get in our own head. And there's this negative cycle of thinking that's broken, and it skews. We can't see anything right around us because all we see is what is wrong around us. We start getting fixated on what's broken. We get fixated on what used to happen to us or what's happening right now, and we forget to look ahead of us. And guys, here's the truth. It's what's ahead of us that gives us hope. And Elijah needed that reminder here. Now, some of you maybe don't believe that what's ahead of you is about to give you hope. I don't always believe that. Maybe you're thinking, hey, I want to have hope, but you don't know my situation. You don't know what's going on with my marriage or my job or my lack of a job or with school or my grades or this diagnosis that I just got. Like prognosis, it's not good. And sometimes it can be hard to believe that we can have hope in what's ahead. But as we talk through this isn't just about what's immediately ahead. I'm not talking about our circumstances. I'm talking about something much bigger than this. I'm talking about our purpose. Elijah is about to find out that he's got a purpose that is bigger than his biggest problem. He's got a purpose that's bigger than an evil queen trying to kill him. And the truth is that you have a purpose too, and your purpose is bigger than your biggest problem. Your purpose will fuel you into what God has for you next. And so as we continue this story, Elijah is right now, of course, the conductor of the complaint train, right? He's just telling God, it's not fair. Here are all of the things that are wrong with my life, but God doesn't shame him or condemn him or even just tell him to get it together. Instead, God gives him some wisdom. He gives him some direction. He tells him what to do next. And so here's what we read, 1 Kings 19. He says, then the Lord told him, go back the same way you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. So basically the Lord is saying to him, your devotion determines your direction. Pastor Dave taught us this last week. Your devotion determines your direction. And so he's telling Elijah, hey, go back to where you came from. So first thing that we've got to notice here is that God gives Elijah something to do. He gives him a purpose, something that's bigger than himself. And if you've ever been in a place like Elijah was, lonely, discouraged, frustrated, anxious, upset, depressed, chances are you don't feel like doing anything. I know I've been there. Chances are you feel like staying in bed, ignoring phone calls, rejecting those text messages. You don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to do anything. And that's where Elijah was in this moment. But God said to him, hey, there's something more out there. You've got a purpose. I'm going to give you something to do. And so if you want guidance and direction from God, the first thing that you have to do is get moving. Now, for all of you note takers out there, pause, write that down. First thing you got to do, get moving. Get moving towards your purpose. For some of you, that means going back to where you started. Some of you started a relationship with Jesus months ago, years ago, maybe even decades ago, but it's become less and less of a priority. And maybe you had good reasons. You know, sometimes we can always convince ourselves we've got good reasons. Maybe your reasons were like, your kids got really involved with travel soccer games and you just stopped coming to church as much on a weekend. Or maybe you started in college and you found a new group of friends and so you convinced yourself you didn't really need a J group. You had these new friends, even though you knew that they weren't pushing you the way that you should be going. Maybe you've been coming to church for a while and you were praying and believing God for some big things in your life and they haven't happened yet. And now you've been thinking and wondering, well, is God really real? Do my prayers really matter? And you've started to get away from Jesus. I want to encourage you today, go back. Get moving. Go back to God. Go back to your why. Go back to where you started, because God has more for your life. It was true for Elijah, and it's true for you. We're going to continue our story here in verse 15. The next thing the Lord tells him, he says, when you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. Then anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, and anoint Elisha to replace you as my prophet. Elisha, Elijah. It's very confusing, all right? I know, their names are very close. But then the next thing God says, he says, anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. So Elijah here gets his next set of directions. The Lord basically says to him, hey, you need to get moving. You need to go back to where you started. And listen, I've got some people for you so that you don't have to do this whole thing alone. If we want direction and guidance for our lives, we have to first get moving. But then second, we got to find a team. We got to find a team. None of us were meant to do this life alone. God designed us to do life with other people. And it doesn't matter who we are. Young, old, married, single, student, extroverted, introverted. We all need other people to become who God has made us to be. We can't do it alone. And so God knows that. He tells Elijah, he says, hey, I'm going to give you two teammates. One is Jehu, one is Elisha. And Jehu becomes king, and Elisha goes on to become Elijah's assistant. He follows him and serves him faithfully for many years, and his legacy lives on through Elisha. We're going to learn a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But if you remember back in this story, God had asked him, hey, what are you doing here, Elijah? And one of the things Elijah said, as he was kind of throwing himself a pity party, was he said, hey, God, I'm the only one. Out of all of these people, I'm the only one who's truly devoted to you. And so what we're going to read next is the final part of God's direction to Elijah. And let's just say he kind of sets him straight. All right. So here's what the Lord says in verse 18. The Lord says this, yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal, who was a false god. So basically in response, God is saying here, Elijah, listen, you don't quite have the whole picture. You're not the only one who's devoted to me. You're not the only one who loves me. In fact, there are 7,000 other people in Israel who love me. 7,000 people. Because so often we get caught in this trap of thinking that we're the only ones. It's not fair. We're all alone. And so if you want guidance and direction in your life, you got to get moving. You got to find a team. But then finally, you've got to shift your perspective. And for Elijah, shifting his perspective was realizing that he was not as alone as he thought that he was. And here's the tough thing for many of us. When we feel like we're alone, it's often because we're choosing to be alone. I know that's hard. I know I've been there sometimes in my life. I was there a few weeks ago. Maybe some of you have found yourselves there in this time of quarantine, but I felt very alone. Now I'm extroverted. I'm used to being surrounded by a whole lot of people. And even in that, I felt isolated. I felt alone. I felt like my world had changed so drastically over the last couple of weeks. The demands on my life had increased tenfold. I was trying to figure out how to work full-time from home with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, which is basically impossible. All right, all you parents out there can relate to that. It's basically impossible. And I felt overwhelmed. When it came to leadership, man, I was leading through things I've never led through before. I've never been in a global pandemic. And so I was leading projects I've never led before, and teams I've never led before, and people I'd never led before. And most days I ended the day feeling like I hadn't done it very well. I felt overwhelmed. And then I was on the phone. I was calling people who are part of this church who were going through some of the darkest seasons in their lives. People who had parents who died from COVID-19, and I had no idea what I was supposed to say to them. I'd be on the phone and like, God, what do you say in this moment to somebody who is experiencing such heartbreak? I felt totally unequipped. I felt totally unqualified, and I felt totally alone. And the longer I felt alone, the longer I chose to be alone. And then I started thinking, man, I care about everybody else so much. I care so much about my kids. I care so much about my family. I care so much about my job and the people I work with and the people I serve. And it kind of feels like nobody cares about me. And then I let that kind of go on and on and on. And I got to a point where not only was I alone, but I had convinced myself that no one really cared about me the way I cared about them. And a few weeks ago, I had a friend who called me. She was pretty forceful about it. She's like, hey, we got to set up a time to talk. And she called me, and for an hour and a half, she asked me questions about me. I had these moments where I would try to ask her a question about her, and she'd turn the conversation back to me. And I felt so loved, and I felt cared for. Now, some of you guys out there are like, feelings on the phone? I don't know about that. My husband has probably never had an hour and a half long conversation on the phone about his feelings in his entire life. So that's not the point. But the point was, I wasn't as alone as I thought that I was. I had just fooled myself into thinking that, and I had to shift my perspective. And it was that conversation with that friend that helped me shift that perspective, that I wasn't as alone as I thought that I was, that people did care about me, but I had to make a choice to let them in. And sometimes that's the harder choice to make. And so that is what God is telling Elijah in this moment. And Elijah's story shows us something so important, which is that when we face our problems, our people and our purpose will carry us through. We will have problems, but our people and our purpose will carry us through. Elijah was not going to let his problems, even his biggest ones, become bigger than the purpose that God had for him and what God was doing in his life. We can't do this life alone, and we can't do it without a clear why. So when we have a few people in our lives who are going the same direction, who are there to remind us we're not alone, to encourage us, to cheer us on, to support us, to challenge us, and when we remember why we're doing this whole thing in the first place, then we have hope. And so we're going to look at this final part of Elijah's story, and it's the legacy that he leaves. Now, if you're listening for the voice of God, you're asking for direction, you're wondering what's next and what God is telling you to do, I can tell you that one thing is whatever God tells us isn't meant just for us. When God speaks to us, when God tells us something, it's because he wants to do something in us and through us to make a difference in the world around us. And so remember when the Lord, he told him, hey, go and find this guy named Elisha. He's going to be your assistant. Thankfully, Elijah listens. He gets up and he says, okay, I'm going to get moving. I'm going to go find my team. And so he finds Elisha in a field plowing with 12 team of oxen. And so Elijah goes over to Elisha, the guy that God said, this is the guy to be your assistant. He goes over to him and he throws his coat on him. And then he walks away, which is so weird, all right? There are weird stories in the Bible, and this is one of them. Can you imagine anybody in your life coming up to you while you're just like doing your everyday thing, you're doing your job, they throw their coat on you and then walk away? It's weird. But you gotta understand the cultural context here. Because at the time, throwing your coat or your cloak on someone was a way of symbolizing that you saw something in them. So this was Elijah's way of saying to Elisha, I see something in you. Maybe you've had that experience with a mentor or a J group leader or a friend or a boss, somebody who has taken time to encourage you and help you see a dream that maybe you hadn't been able to see yet yourself. That's what's happening in this moment. And then Elisha has a decision to make. Is he going to follow Elijah? And so we learn soon that he did. So here's what we read. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 21 says this. So Elisha returned to his oxen and slaughtered them. He used the wood from the plow to build a fire to roast their flesh. Ew, that's gross, all right? But then it says he passed around the meat to all the townspeople and they all ate. Then he went with Elijah as his assistant. All right, so here's what you got to see. Elisha was not playing, all right? So not only did he decide he was going to follow Elijah, he decided he was going to give it all up. I mean, he burned everything that he had, everything that he knew, and he decided, you know what, Elijah, I'm going with you. And the two of them journeyed on for many years together. And as we continue to read this story, we see that there are a few times where God tells Elijah where he wants him to go next. 3 times, God tells Elijah, I want you to go to these places. First, he says, I want you to go to Bethel. Then he says, I want you to go to a place called Jericho. Then he says, hey, I want you to go to the Jordan River. And all 3 times, Elijah looks at his assistant, looks at Elisha, and says, hey, God's telling me to go here. You can't come with me. You stay here. And all 3 times, Elisha says, no way. Heck no. As surely as the Lord shall live, I'm coming with you. And the Bible doesn't tell us why Elijah was making that decision. It doesn't tell us why Elijah was telling his assistant, hey, you stay here, I'm going on. But I think part of it was Elijah felt like he had direction from God, and he was like, I'm doing it. I'm chasing after it. I don't need anybody else. But Elisha knew part of his purpose was to serve Elijah, and he wasn't going to let him be alone again. He wasn't going to let him be isolated again. So all 3 times he said, no, I'm coming with you. And in the end, it's all worth it. He follows Elijah. And right before Elijah dies, or more accurately, is just taken up into heaven. Again, it's weird. You can read about it all in the Bible. It's crazy. So right before Elijah is taken up into heaven, he turns to Elisha and he says, hey, what do you want? And here's what we read next. When they came to the other side, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I am taken away. And Elisha replied, please let me inherit a double portion of your spirit and become your successor. The Message, which is another version of the Bible, puts it like this, that Elisha's response was, I want your life repeated in my life. It was legacy. That's what he said to him. That's what he desired most. And Elisha went on to continue Elijah's legacy. Right after Elijah was taken away, we read about the first recorded miracle that Elisha performed. He was walking in Elijah's footsteps. He became known later as a man of God, which is the same title that the prophet Elijah had when he was here. And like all of us, Elisha faced problems. It wasn't easy. I'm sure it wasn't easy to hear your mentor, the person that you look up to, say, hey, no, you can't come with me, you stay here. He faced some big problems. He had some big challenges, but he didn't let those things deter him because he knew his purpose was bigger than his problems. He knew that when we face our problems, our people and our purpose will carry us through. He had his people. He had Elijah, his mentor and his friend that he served faithfully for years. And he had his purpose, which was to follow a great prophet and then go on to become a great prophet himself. And I think so many of us, we want our purpose here and now, but Elisha knew our purpose cannot be rushed. We want it now, but God says, hey, you don't want it now because I'm about to do something so incredible in your life, but it's gonna take time. And Elisha was okay with that. He waited it out. He served Elijah faithfully behind the scenes for years and years. And I imagine that he had moments where he got frustrated. I imagine he had moments where he just felt like, man, this isn't fair. I gave up everything for you. Like, remember the barbecue oxen that I gave up? Like, I was passing it around to everybody in the town. I said, I'm chasing after you. I'm following you. And despite all of that, he knew what his purpose was. So he didn't give up. He kept on with Elijah, and as a result, he received what he wanted the most, a double portion, blessing, honor. And so today, I think all of us have to ask ourselves this question: what is my why, and who are my whos? What's my why, and who are my whos? Our purpose and our people. Both of those things matter so much. Because when life gets hard, which it will, if it's not hard right now, it'll be hard tomorrow or next week or in a couple of months. When we go through times where we've lost our job or we didn't get into the school that we hoped that we would, or we feel alone or depressed or discouraged or betrayed, or we have this nagging sense that we're just not enough. We feel like we can't see a way out. We have to know what is our why and who are our whos. We've got to have a purpose and we've got to have our people. That's how we get propelled into what God has for us next. And so the truth is that for every single one of us, God has more. He's got more for me, and He's got more for you. He's got more for us than loneliness. He has more for us than frustration. He's got more for us than disappointment or discouragement or depression. He has more for us. But we've got to set our eyes on what's ahead. That has to be the thing that brings us hope. He's got people for all of us who are going to stand by us in the toughest moments of our lives and celebrate with us in the best ones. He's got a purpose for every single one of us that's bigger than ourselves. He has a legacy that every single one of us can leave, but we have to be willing to see it. This is why for us that our groups exist. It's why J groups are so important. And we're going to start a summer semester in just a couple of weeks. And I want to encourage you, decide right now, this weekend, I'm going to join one. And not just sign up, I'm actually going to go. Because I want to find some people. I want to find my team that God has for me. And this is why Plugged In exists. It's all about helping you activate the purpose that God has for you and your life through serving. So decide right now, hey, I'm gonna attend Plugged In. Listen guys, it's easier than ever before. It's on demand, which means no excuses. You can do it anytime, anywhere. But your life will never be the same until you know why you're here. Purpose fuels us. Our people fuel us. And so no matter how big your problems seem right now, your God is bigger. He's bigger than your biggest problem. He's bigger than cancer. He's bigger than that disappointment. He's bigger than that job loss. He's bigger than your divorce. And he definitely is bigger than COVID-19. God is bigger, but you're gonna need some people and you're gonna need your purpose to fuel you on to believe that. He is bigger. Now for some of you today, this idea that God is big, that hope can be here, maybe it feels really far away. You know, maybe you love this idea. You're like, yes, I'm with you. I love this idea of finding my purpose and my people, but I don't really know like what that really means or where to start or how to start. And I think for so many of us, we're trying to start in the wrong place. We're trying to start by thinking, okay, maybe I can just find the passion within myself. I can find hope within myself if I just try harder, if I just do more. And the truth is, we find hope in Jesus. We find hope in saying yes to the one that God sent for us. He sent his son Jesus because he loved us so much, because he knew we were gonna have so many problems in our lives that we needed a hope bigger than ourselves. He sent Jesus so that we could be brought into a right relationship with him. And so if you've been trying to kind of muster up all that hope on your own and it's left you discouraged, disappointed, empty, that's because your next yes is to say yes to Jesus. And I love the honor of leading you in prayer right now. If you've never made that decision, your purpose starts here. Your purpose starts with saying yes to Jesus. So I want to invite you, join me in this prayer. Pray it with me. Decide that today is your day to give your life to Jesus. God, we come to you today and we thank you for who you are. God, you are bigger. You're bigger than our biggest problem. And God, right now, I surrender. I surrender control. I surrender everything I'm trying to hold on to. I surrender my view and my picture of how life is supposed to look. And instead, I say, I want you to lead my life. I put my faith in Jesus today. He is the leader and the Lord of my life. And God, I pray that I will find real hope in your Son, Jesus.